Namaste and welcome to Professor Nomesh Bolia ji. He is Principal Investigator IKS Division at IIT Delhi. Thank you so much, Professor, and for joining us today at our Changemakers interview. Yeah. Could you tell me about your how your interest in IKS started and the shift, or rather, a tuning in from engineering to IKS studies?
Before we start, this is not an IKS division. It's a project right now at IIT Delhi. It's a research project that we call IKS program because apart from doing some research, we are also planning to, for example, float courses and or help IIT to float courses and conduct workshops, roundtables, things of that. So my journey into IKS, so I got into engineering by reading a book by Jules Verne, which talks about how a bunch of people get dropped onto an island, and they don't have anything, and they somehow manage to figure their way out in all that aloofness. And both of these people were engineers, and they knew how to make things from scratch. So that was the motivation to get into engineering. But behind that always was this yearning to sort of, be creative and make an impact. And over time, through my IIT Bombay, which is where I did my BTech, I got exposed to a whole lot of ideas, people, programs, clubs, organizations, which gave me, I think, a fairly good exposure to what we are as a country. The fact that we did not start off only in 1947. And that is when our modern republic journey started. But then we are what we now call a civilizational, state almost, although formally we don't define ourselves that way. And this civilization is quite old, but it is not good or great only because it's old. It is good and great because it has contributed a lot, which it has done because of the immense amount of knowledge that our ancestors have produced in almost all kinds of fields. So the more I started getting exposed to it, the more I realized that if impact is what we are chasing, if, in Swami Vivekananda's word, apart from Atmano Mokshartham, if we are looking at Jagad Hitaya, then IKS is the way to go. Also, one way of doing Jagat Hitaya is to do selfless service, right? So, we do that in our own way. I have been doing that since my IIT Bombay days. But if that change has to be lasting, we need to power it through knowledge and through institutions, which the knowledge of our country has been able to sort of set in place. As an example, we have this amazing institution of the family, right? Very broad and deep definition. And, all countries, of course, have families and things like that. But the way we have been able to put all of it together, sustain, and even now do whatever we are doing is there because there is a strong philosophical discourse as well as examples and role models on how a family can function. Similarly, the way we have looked at all other segments of the society, the way we have classified our society, the way we have state, the way we have looked at science, all of that amounts to creating structures and mechanisms that in the long run, in a very sort of sustainable way, look at how life can be led very meaningfully. I think all of this needs to be brought through is the realization that I had the more I got exposed. And that explains my journey from being an engineer to IKS.
I have got some few questions if I could just go through them so that I can efficiently use your time. So the first one is science today, while moving towards specialization, I mean, there's ultra specialization in everything from medicine to engineering, is also steering towards fusing of subjects which were studied separately. Like we have today a combination biochemistry, astrophysics, mathematical physics, etc. In this context, what are your thoughts on IIT studying IKS topics and reinstating IKS as a science?
What was the first line you mentioned? There is some lag. The
Like
first line that
while we are moving towards specialization and super specialization, we are also looking at subjects which were earlier looked at individually, now being looked at together, which is what a lot of Indic subjects do, they don't look at any topic in isolation. In Ayurveda, for instance, you have to know Jyotisha, you have to know a bit of yoga, you need to know a bit of dietary practice. So, how do we merge this westernized way of looking at science and an Indian way of looking at science
Yeah, yeah.
through
So,
Ayurveda?
you know, I I think there are two dimensions of knowledge, right? One is the breadth dimension, the other is the depth dimension. Um, all our history of modern science tells us that the breakthrough innovations really come when you get insights from a variety of areas and put them all together, and then a given discipline will use those insights and then take it forward, run with it, do some innovations, discoveries, inventions. I think that is the way to really do great things, path breaking things. For example, Einstein, when he started looking at whatever he did, if he did not have ideas from initially he was struggling with the mathematics, right, for his special relativity work. If he would not dealt with mathematics in a different way from what physicists of that time were doing, he would not have been able to do whatever he did, right? Likewise, look at the example of all great scientists, all great inventors. In today's age, people talk about Elon Musk, for example. Right now, Elon Musk, for example, if he was a mechanical engineer, right, that's my department here. If he was only good at mechanical, he would not be able to do the kind of interplanetary work that he's aspiring to do, right? I'm not a right of Elon Musk, right? So just as an example, good things happen when you learn from other things. Look at AI, artificial intelligence, right? So the whole idea starts from having an understanding of how neurons possibly function, right? That's why there are artificial neural networks. So biology in many ways has sort of given insights and at least starting points to do developments in computer science, in mathematics, a whole bunch of that stuff. So I think it's important to get insights from other disciplines and not get too closed in disciplines, right? For breakthrough things to happen. Now, if IKS were to come into our fold, we would get some of these insights which we are right now not able to get at all. For example, it is now that Professor K. Ram Subramaniam of IIT Bombay, he has also published peer-reviewed journals about how the Kerala School of Mathematics in our country had developed calculus. And their way of doing calculus was different. Right? But my point is, in Principia Mathematica, Newton's book, the way calculus was done was quite different from how we do it today. His motivation, first of all, to develop also was astronomy based. He wanted to do something about planetary motions. That is how we also stumbled on it. Our way was different. Now the point is, if 400 years after Newton, people had not worked on physics and mathematics the way they did, today's calculus would not have been as useful as it is. Now, we don't know if there are other ways of looking at calculus that could potentially have emerged from the Kerala School of Mathematics, because we were busy. We could not really work on taking that forward. So my is that there are possibly inventories and discoveries waiting for us to be discovered, using some of the basics things that we have done already. And then quite new things, quite new ideas, even inventions can possibly emerge. So I think the way to summarize, the way to do this, to put it in context, is to become broad and take insights from a whole variety of sources. One variety of those sources can be what is called modern knowledge, right? So from different disciplines in that modern knowledge, and you do that. People do that all the time, right? And then breakthrough stuff happens. But then one can even expand that circle a little and say, why only modern knowledge, right? Maybe there is knowledge which right now, because of whatever the arc of history, has not got its due attention. Maybe that will give a completely different set of ideas for us to work on. And if we do that, then we will be able to, come up with quite fantastic work. How, and I think will only be clear once we start, going on the journey. But the fact that we have many ideas, that is there for everyone to see, right? For example, calculus being there 200 years before Newton, that's there for everybody to see. And so there is no reason to new things cannot work out from that if we were to apply our best minds and best brains to it.
Thank you. The research focus of IKS, as mentioned in the website, in IIT Delhi is said to be structured around four platforms emanating from epistemological frameworks of IKS. So, can a difference in epistemology be overcome to study Indian and Western knowledge on the same platform? I think it's very similar to what we spoke earlier. But what are
Yeah,
the four focus areas of IKS? Could you just tell us some more about that?
yeah, sure. So, I mean, this is IIT Delhi in this specific project, right? People, even in IIT Delhi, might be working on IKS in other areas. And of course, IKS as such, you know, the other way to sort of summarize everything that I said earlier is, we don't intend IKS to be a subject, right? To be a vertical, and this to inform our knowledge and inform our systems and our life in a variety of disciplines. So we intend this to be a horizontal. So there is an IK, there can be an IKS way of doing science, there can be a IKS way of doing engineering, there can be a IKS way of doing philosophy, of course, of political science, of everything, right? So it is a horizontal that should populate everything. So therefore, one cannot confine IKS to a specific set of areas. Right? That's the first point. So we had to therefore choose some areas to potentially focus on, right? And so we thought, let us four areas that really matter in terms of being able to create an impact. Now, creating impact, we don't want to restrict ourselves to only discover what we have done in the past. Right? So that, of course, has to be done, right? But we don't want to restrict ourselves to that. We want to do that and then figure out how and what part of that can be useful for us today and tomorrow, now and in the future. And so we thought, let us identify some areas. So what we said is, one of the first few things that is among the first few things that is useful for creating any reasonable nation society is education, right? One thing that clearly emerges apart from the philosophy of education, when you look at IKS sources, right, books, texts, when you imagine, conceive gurukuls, right, rishis, all of that, is the pedagogy was extremely different. It was nothing close to what we do today. In terms of dimensions, it seems like an alien territory if you look. So to be able to understand that pedagogy and to identify specific elements from that also, if not the complete, if we can get the complete framework and do it today, nothing like it. But obviously we can't, at least not as a first step. And so taking specific pedagogy and then using that to inform some aspects of our education today. So education and pedagogy is one platform to focus on the individual and his or her job. It has to be combined with the health and well-being, right? And so therefore the other platform is health and well-being, where things like Ayurveda, things like meditation, right, wellness, all of that something that we want to work on. And while there is some kind of work that happens around trying to validate these methods, right, trying to validate yoga, the impact of meditation, etc., that work is welcome. People do that. Our program might also do some of that. But what we would like to focus on is how does it become a system that informs our people today, right? So how does it become possible for me as an individual to go to a Vaidya when I need, not necessarily when I get ill, but when I need, right? Even in terms of health, as a default option, not as an option that only people who have the right connects can go to a right Vaidya, right? So what all does it? It takes some policy measures, but there are other things also that are needed to put the system together. So focusing on the systemic part of that is in terms of the health and well-being platform. The third thing that we want to do is, so this is how an individual gets affected, right, through an education and through well-being. The big sort of elephant in the room, right, the big player which influences all kinds of policies and institutions today, whether we like it or not, right, is the state. So that is what we call the public system. So what is our conception of systems? What is the purpose of those institutions? Where do they derive their, sacredness or whatever their authenticity from? And what are the kind of things that public systems should do, should not do, how they should do it, things like that. So the theory and the practice of public systems is the other platform, right? So there is and then there is the larger sort of framework, the institutional framework of the state that we want to work on. And lastly, a multiplier for all of this that we have figured in today's world, particularly after the industrial revolution in the in Europe, in the UK specifically, is technology. So, what is IKS view on technology? Right, our dream is to be able to identify technology products that are IKS. So, we are not talking technology for IKS, right? We are not saying how we can use ABC platform and disseminate IKS. We are saying how do we use, right? So one, just as an example, one thing that we know, and I share this with I come across, is what makes anything sustainable, dharmic, is our sort of broad way of using the word sustainability. A technology which will enforce and enhance the community, right? A community feeling, strengthen communities is probably what one characteristic of being dharmic and sustainable, right? / sustainable is. Now, what we see probably as a result of the way Western Europe and North America later has started looking at society and individuals, right, through a prism of them being consumers and them being individuals more than communities and families, is that all technological products somehow seem to perpetuate that idea, right? So, there was the television first, then came the telephone, and then the mobile phone, and those vision glasses, right? So away from the community, right? Although it appears that we are making community groups and online communities and all of that, but effectively our relationships and our community structures, they do suffer as a result of some current uses of technology. So what kind of a technology product will it be that perpetuates and strengthens communities instead of limiting and breaking them apart, right? So at such broad level, at a meta kind of a level, what would technology mean is something that we want to work on. Now, they're called platforms because the current academic way of doing research identifies a very specific problem, and then there is a set of tools and methods that one uses to then take research forward. Because IKS, as such, this framework of knowledge that we have, that we are calling IKS, has not been worked upon for such a long time, right? We, at this point of time, we can't really concretely only define problems and expect that the area will go. There has to be some meta thinking in these areas before we can go forward, right? Some broad thinking. What is technology? What is an IKS technology, etc., for example.
Some common understanding of definition.
Yeah. And so, a very fundamental understanding, meta level of understanding. We make our own agenda and we don't follow agenda that is set somewhere else. Agenda that perpetuates, dharma in the sense of being sustainability, etc. So that is the work that we want to do, and that therefore necessarily entails one, doing research, the current conventional way of doing research, taking a problem, working on it, etc. That we want to do. But then it will also involve a lot of other thought building effort. So, doing workshops and doing roundtables and getting people together, creating a certain environment, new ideas and new thoughts can come up, which will then, eventually lead to specific problems being identified for research. So because it will do a whole variety of things in these 4 sectors, we're calling them platforms. So that's how the overall program is structured.
You mentioned that you just come back from the Kumbh, Professor. So, given these 4 platforms, how would you analyze the Kumbh as an experience where all these 4 elements come together? But also, it's a many universities in the US, including Harvard, have done use this as a case study for in terms of modern community with very ancient values, and at the level at which it is has been set up this time is uses it uses technology, but it's also a technology by itself on how it is functioning without too much of issue. So how would you describe your experience of the Kumbh with relation to the work that you're doing?
Yeah. No, that's a very good question, actually. And, maybe I should just plan a course around that, actually. There's so much to say. One thing, right? And even if we were to do a course, given the amount of knowledge that we have about Kumbh and about Indian knowledge itself, we may not be able to do justice. We don't understand everything, right? It's hard to understand. See, we are in touch with technology. So we know that after 144 years, presumably the Mahakumbh has happened, right? But there are so many people who are not in touch with technology the way we are, right? And yet they are able to come, right? So, I mean, this itself, I think, figuring out what at the very first level, gets people to come, not in terms of motivation, but how do they even come to know that, okay, Kumbh is about. So I think that itself is something that is amazing. The other thing that was amazing was, how if, the state is able to put it acts together and recognizes and the civilizational component, right? And encourages it and facilitates it, then good things can happen, right? So except for one or two instances, I think the Kumbh this time was fairly well managed. We are seeing reports about that all over the place. So if the state were to use this opportunity, one is it has enabled this coming together of people. So if the role of the state is to keep people together, right, then Kumbh is one of the best ways to generate that feeling of oneness, right? Apart from so many other things that we do. And imagine being able to do that over centuries. So I think that is where the state comes in. So the specific thing that I'm sharing is it needs to detect where people derive their sacred and their motivation from and facilitate that, right? And not get caught up in its own ideologies, right? So it has a civilization component. Technology itself, whereas there is all kinds of technology being used. So there is a pontoon bridge, temporary bridge that's set up to cross Ma Ganga and Ma Yamuna, right? All of that. So that is there. But then apart from that, quick setting up of tents, this, that, there's technology all over the place, right? But I'm still not satisfied because this is still technology for IKS, right? But if a really good Kumbh were to happen, and if we were to do it using our own civilizational genius, I think a very different form of Kumbh will emerge, which will not lead to even so that little pollution that is happening right now, which will be a lot more about sustainability. It will be a lot more about generating ideas together, which still happens at Kumbh, but I think it will happen in a much better way if you're able to, delve deep into our own knowledge. Visiting Kumbh is a pedagogy in itself. You just have to, all your notions about what education is, how people can come together, how they will not fight against each other if you put so many people in one place. All of that is immediately obvious to you. You go there with a very open mind and you understand how things work, right? Amount of lecturing and no amount of book reading can do that. So just visit Kumbh and understanding the various dimensions, from logistics to knowledge to spirituality to our own experience, everything is just amazing. One thing that, for example, my son learned this time is that you can visit and take a dip into Ma Ganga in the month of January when it is freezing, right? And unfortunately, by the time we were able to take the dip, it was already 5 p.m. Right? So in the evening time, and not get cold, get fever,
That's
right? So I mean, it's amazing actually. He could immediately get it. I didn't have to explain. Nobody had to explain anything to him. He was quite excited, of course, but then overall, just this one experience will make sure that it's there in his mind forever.
Absolutely. I was seeing a document which is being circulated by a Swamiji of Chinmaya Mission, and he was saying, what is the Snanam Paddhati that we have to follow before the Snan? And he was, I mean, there's so much detail, even, as to what has to be chanted, but like that is not actually coming out when most people put their selfies and things. But there is so much of science into why, the number of times we do, why do we do three times? And there was another video in which, when somebody asked Swami Chinmayananda, there's Ganga, there's Yamuna, where is Saraswati? So he's saying all those great people who are coming here, all the Naga sadhus and all the scholars who are coming, they represent Saraswati. So, I mean, there is so much of depth in our civilization. And it's great that you're doing work like this, which can actually highlight, some points which may get missed when if we just look at it in terms of stories and other stuff.
Yeah. But another take that I have on this is there are many layers to this knowledge, right? So the reason why we call it a Triveni Sangam could also be that at some point of time, when Saraswati was still overground, right? And now there is some amount of if not irrefutable, uh, then it would actually be, a Triveni also, right?
Right.
Really,
For
levels,
yeah.
right? But then, to be able to reflect and experience the kind of knowledge that you talked about, right? The way of doing mantras, everything around it. Um, so we need to do a much more thorough job of understanding what is being talked about, right? And to be able to even understand and appreciate what it is doing to us. Some of it we will be able to measure through devices, etc. Right? The impact of some of these practices, the way you talked about. But things are so fundamental and things are so mysterious right now that
Hmm.
even to detect that something good has come out of these practices,
Yeah.
we will have to look at our own level of experiences and what we might call
Yeah.
intuition, or we can even detect what's going on, right? So I think we need to be able to finally go to that level. And a lot of change in the way we do our education and the way we live life has to happen before we come to that level. I'll give you an example. We eating sattvic food, right? So, maybe about 8, 10 years back, I could not differentiate, right? Oh, I mean, what's the big deal? Now, to people, I onion and garlic, right? And I can actually feel, right now, because I've
Hmm.
sort of trying to become more aware of myself, I can
Yeah.
actually feel if there is some of these elements in the food, my energy level goes a little down. So I mean, one has to sort of become aware, right? One has to go deeper to be able
True.
to even understand the impact of some of these things. Otherwise, if and some of these could be so subtle that no device will be able to measure. Now, how does one measure my energy just because
Yeah.
I've eaten these?
True.
So we need to be able to. This is epistemology, right? We need to be able to create new ways of understanding and making sense of knowledge, right? That is required. If you're able to do all of this together, and it seems so mammoth right now, but if
Hmm.
you're able to together, it will be a very, very different world. Much more, I guess, sustainable, much more prosperous also. But for us to, do that seems mammoth right now. And imagine if whatever we hear and read and understand from our seniors is really true, they this mammoth is what was happening at scale. It was not one group of people or
Yeah.
individuals or communities. At scale, people were living this kind of life.
Hmm.
Fantastic. That itself should be a for people to go deeper into some of these things.
Yes. Do we have the resources even with big institutes like IITs to do longitudinal studies of such phenomenon?
Not right now. Not right now. I think the resources that we have are only enough to elevate some understanding, to do some basic level of research to bring forth some of these ideas and start discovering them. But to be able to do longitudinal studies, no, no, definitely not. Even the conventional longitudinal studies, we don't have the resources. IIT itself doesn't give any resources, right? It doesn't have any resources. It's a receiver, right? There's no way of generating resources. I mean, it cannot decide, for example, how much fee it should charge, right? So there are, ways and means in which that is decided.
Mm.
So very little ways and means to raise resources, and we can't suddenly stop investments that we are making in other areas to be pumped into this, right? What will need to happen is our people, our society will have to understand that it is their life and the life of their future generations that is at stake, and therefore they should really start investing in it, right? So if people uh, can invest money to do X, Y, Z, ABC kind of research, all kinds of research centers come up, right? Why can't they
Mm.
spend some amount and invest some amount in doing this kind of work also? Also, I think the way in which an IKS way of doing longitudinal study also, I think will probably emerge and will be different from the way we do longitudinal studies now, right? So, what to measure and how to measure that, how to is that, all of that could potentially change if we were able to do some of these things together. For example, in a longitudinal study, when we finally analyze the data, right, a core assumption underlying that is that the data has come from random sources and therefore there are some statistical
Mm.
methods. We do that all the time, right? But uh, every individual on the other hand is also unique, right? And for what will be a study that accounts for this uniqueness of all these individuals? Statistification, leveraging the randomness and the beautiful properties of random behavior may not really work, right? So then, what the approach itself of doing such studies will completely alter. I think we really need to a lot of work to be done. We right now have, yeah. See another example. Much of the medicines and they are validated today because of these trials, right? Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 kind of trials. That some statistics of some kind, right? Because it sort of assumes that human bodies sort of tend to work in a given way, in a similar kind of way. That is true. All the same species, of course, there's some similarity, right? But Ayurveda, on the other hand, works at a very, very personal level, right? So, how do we use that strength of Ayurveda? How does Ayurveda itself become a little, more advanced, using its own principles, without falling into trying to fit itself into the modern medical framework, right? The allopathic. These are, big questions, challenging questions that we need to answer. But what we have is evidence that personalized medicines can work and preventive health can work. That is, our evidence. We know that. We need to now build a more theoretical kind of framework around some of these things.
Sure. I'll just close with one last question. I think we're running out of time. What, in your view, is the most pressing problem in the world today in which IKS can direct technologies to a more ethical and conscious framework to dealing with these issues?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a great point, and we have been brainstorming on this question for quite some time. It's there on everyone's mind, and quite frankly, although our conviction is that almost every problem that you can look at can benefit from IKS, right? Right. So, I mean, personally also, I think I'm fairly convinced about that. But before it really happen, we are maybe some decades, if not centuries, away from that stage, right? But there are some problems where I think right now also have something to offer, if not a whole lot. Right. One of that is the whole thing of sustainability, right? So, how does one live sustainably as an individual? How does one live as a society, right? As a community in a more sustainable way? That is something that our life has, our way of living and our way of organizing ourselves can teach us. As an example, we, in this country, in a variety of ways, we see sustainable practices at scale without any government, NGO, anybody pushing for it, right? So, for instance, we used to be able to, maybe at least 2 decades back, we for sure were doing it. Even now, in large parts of the country, we do it. There's this whole thing about circular economy, right? Where we should not be producing a lot of waste, right? Etc. Etc. There are well-defined mechanisms in our country to deal with waste. First, to reduce waste, and then to deal with waste. So we don't throw, in a dump, right? At least traditionally, we don't do that. Parts of the country today don't do that, right? So, what is it that is enabling us for people to, face all this inconvenience and yet not, throw everything? And then how have we developed what kind of, these are not super, super high or advanced by going by current means, but how are we able to put all of this together? How are we able to create a, so that, if I produce some waste, somebody, for example, the kabadi wala, right? They are able to look at some of these things and put things together and yet run a sustainable business out of it, right? A financially sustainable. This is one example. Similarly, there are many, another example that often comes to my mind, which right now, unfortunately, is almost gone, is we used to see what are called piaus, right? So, sort of public places that the government would not set up, but the community or some dhani Seth, would set up. Everybody could go and have water, right, at that place. Now, that was not funded by anyone, not pushed by anyone, right? It was exist and in large parts, at scale things. So, understanding the motivation, the why, the what of it, and the how of it, I think will lead us to critical insights on how a more sustainable world can happen. One last example, we'll stop. I personally think that unless fund is managed, right, unless we are willing to agree to it, that there are limitations to how much we can consume. If we don't put those limitations, no amount of resources and no amount of technology can make the difference. We can be interplanetary, but then we will end up consuming the resources of that other planet also, right? So,
That's true.
right, and our wants can be infinite. So, a very simple, basic idea tells us that there has to be some limit. Now, the question is, how do we bring that limit about, right? It's very deeply tied to our way of looking at life itself, and that's why at scale, so many of us are able to limit our wants. But fasting, for example, is a simple way. There are so many other things. List them down, it'll be a whole bunch of things. So looking at that and figuring out how we're talking about scale here, not one, two people who will get motivated. How at scale we can motivate people on their own account to limit their wants and therefore contribute to making of a sustainable world. There is an entire set of practices, technology, knowledge, wisdom that is there to power it. It does not come out of accident, although it is a right. So that itself, I think, can lead to a significant in solving the problem of sustainability, apart from other things as we go along.
Thank you so much. I think a lot of us would benefit if you at IIT Delhi, try and bring group these ideas together for solutions to certain problems. The thing is, the knowledge is so vast, and most of us are, so busy doing whatever we are doing that we don't actually have the time or the bandwidth to search for this knowledge. I think you're doing great work, and we'll be the lucky recipients of your hard work.
No, not just me, not just us. A bunch of people will have to come together. I think only then something
Yeah,
substantial will come up. But thank you for those kind words, and hopefully we'll be able to work on this together, all of us. Whole
absolutely.
this journey.
Thank you so much, Professor. Namaste, and have a good day. Thank you.
Yeah, you too. Have a great day.
Thank you.